Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. It was a sunny morning in an upscale suburb of Washington, D.C., a neighborhood where the houses exuded wealth and tranquility. Clarice Beaufort, a judge on the Court of Appeals, had just left her residence after a long week of deliberations. Elegant in her cream-colored suit, her dark hair neatly braided, she settled into the driver's seat of her luxury car, a black sedan she had recently purchased to celebrate her 10 years on the bench. As she was about to leave the driveway, a siren suddenly blared behind her. 2 police cars blocked his path. A young white officer, nervous but authoritative, stepped forward, hand on his weapon. "Turn off the engine and get out of the vehicle," he ordered sharply. Surprised but calm, Clarice complied. "Officer, is there a problem?" she asked politely. The officer, Sergeant Mark Ellison, glanced at his onboard computer. "This car was reported stolen this morning. You will come with me to the station." Clarice frowned. "That's a mistake. This vehicle belongs to me. Here are the purchase documents and my ID." But Ellison, without even looking at them, brushed them aside with a gesture. "We'll see about that at the police station. You people always know how to make fake documents." Around them, neighbors watched the scene through their windows, some even taking out their phones to film. Clarice felt the burning of humiliation rise in her throat, but she held her head high. "Officer, you are arresting a federal appeals court judge." Ellison gave a sarcastic smile. "And I'm the president, ma'am. Thieves always have good stories." A few seconds later, Clarice was handcuffed in front of passers-by. Her elegant dress wrinkled, her gaze direct, she was pushed into the back of the police car like a criminal. But what Sergeant Ellison didn't know was that at that very moment, Attorney General Antoine Delacroix, an old friend and ally of Clarice, was receiving an emergency call. When he learned that Judge Beaufort, the one who had championed so many causes for racial justice, had just been arrested for stealing her own car, he felt anger boiling inside him. "Don't move, Clarice," he said, picking up the phone. "I'll take care of it personally. This police officer is going to learn what the word means, justice." The Washington Central Police Station buzzed with conversations and nervous laughter when the main door burst open. Clarice Beaufort entered, still handcuffed, flanked by 2 officers. Despite the tension, she stood straight, her face calm. Her dark, dignified gaze swept the room as if she were observing from the bench of a courtroom. Sergeant Mark Ellison pushed her towards the registration desk. "Full name?" asked the agent behind the counter distractedly. "Clarice Beaufort." "Occupation?" "Judge at the Federal Court of Appeals." A silence fell. The office clerk looked up, bewildered. Ellison burst into ironic laughter. "You see? She's still playing her little part. It's almost believable." Clarice didn't reply. She stared at the American flag hanging on the wall and simply murmured, "Justice, even if blind, should not be deaf." But before the interrogation could continue, the police station door opened again, this time with controlled force. All eyes turned to the man who had just entered. It was Antoine Delacroix, Attorney General of the United States. Dark suit, confident stride, sharp gaze. Behind him, 2 federal agents in gray suits were following him. The atmosphere changed instantly. It was as if the air itself froze. "Who arrested Judge Beaufort?" he asked in a calm, but cold voice. Ellison sat up, suddenly less sure of himself. "Me, sir. The vehicle was reported stolen, I simply followed procedure." "The procedure?" Delacroix interrupted. He approached slowly, took a document out of his leather briefcase, and placed it on the registration desk. "Here is the vehicle title, signed and registered in the name of Judge Beaufort less than 10 days ago. So you have just arrested a federal judge, without prior verification, on the pretext that she is black and drives a luxury car." A murmur rippled through the room. The police station captain, alerted by the tension, rushed over. "Mr. Prosecutor, please believe me when I say that we will." "No, Captain. You are not going to examine anything. You are going to release Ms. Beaufort immediately and issue a public apology. Then you are going to give me the full report of this incident, because I intend to open an internal investigation this afternoon. Delacroix took a few steps towards Clarice. His features relaxed slightly. I am sorry that the justice you serve with such honor has forgotten your face today. Clarice gave a slight smile. This isn't the first time the color of my skin has spoken before my words. Delacroix turned towards Ellison. Sergeant Ellison, you will learn the price of judging before you understand. Prepare to appear before the Ethics Committee and the Internal Affairs Department. The sergeant, pale, tried to protest. Sir, I couldn't have known. You could have checked, Delacroix replied coldly. But you preferred to assume. Clarice slowly removed her handcuffs, which the captain quickly unlocked. She placed them on the desk, then looked Ellison straight in the eyes. You don't owe me an apology, officer. But the next person you unjustly arrest might not have a prosecutor to come and save them. A heavy silence followed his words. Delacroix held out his hand, helped him to his feet, and together they left the police station under the ashamed gaze of the police officers. The following morning, the sun rose slowly over the steps of the federal courthouse in Washington. But it was no ordinary day. A dense crowd of journalists, cameras, and citizens had gathered in front of the large marble building. Headlines were already appearing on the screens. A federal judge arrested and falsely accused of car theft. The Attorney General is intervening personally. Clarice Beaufort arrived in an official car, accompanied by Prosecutor Antoine Delacroix. She wore a simple black dress and a beige coat, symbols of her rigor and undiminished dignity. But this time, she was not the austere judge of the hearings, she was a woman determined to shake a system built on prejudice. Flashbulbs popped as soon as she stepped out. Journalists surrounded her, microphones thrust forward. Madam Judge, have you been a victim of racial profiling? What do you think of the police's behavior? Do you intend to file a complaint against Sergeant Ellison? Clarice raised her hand, asking for silence. His voice resonated, clear and calm, but charged with a natural authority. I am here not as a victim, but as a witness. She paused. A witness to what thousands of men and women who don't have my voice, my title, or my connections experience every day. Yesterday, I was arrested, handcuffed, humiliated, not because I had committed a crime, but because the color of my skin was enough to arouse suspicion. The journalists fell silent. Even passers-by, standing on the sidewalks, seemed to hang on his every word. If this can happen to a federal appeals court judge, imagine what someone with no power, no protection, and whose word carries no weight has to endure. Behind her, Antoine Delacroix watched in silence, admiring his friend's composure and quiet strength. Clarice continued. Justice should not only be served in the courts. It must live in the streets, in police stations, in every glance a police officer gives a citizen. As long as fear of difference guides weapons and actions, we will all be threatened. A murmur of emotion rippled through the crowd. Some journalists discreetly wiped away a tear. Then, in a softer but firm voice, she concluded. I am not asking for revenge. I am asking for an awakening. Because silence in the face of injustice is still a form of complicity. Applause erupted. Citizens began chanting his name. Delacroix approached and whispered. You have just turned a humiliation into a national lesson. Clarice simply replied. No, Antoine. I only told the truth. But now it's up to them to listen to it. At that moment, in a corner of the crowd, Sergeant Mark Ellison watched the scene, his head down. The judge's words hit him harder than any punishment. For the first time, he understood what the weight of prejudice meant. And deep down, he knew that this day would mark his life forever. 3 weeks later, the Washington Police Department's Ethics and Internal Affairs Committee hearing room was packed. Under the cold glare of the fluorescent lights, police officers, journalists, and observers waited for the hearing to begin. That day, it was no longer Judge Clarice Beaufort presiding, she herself would be the one to testify. And, ironically, Sergeant Mark Ellison, her former accuser, would be questioned about his own actions. The silence was almost religious when Clarice entered the room. His slow, controlled gait commanded respect. Even those who didn't know her could feel the quiet strength emanating from her. Facing her, Ellison sat with his head down and his face pale. He had lost his confidence, replaced by a sincere fear, that of a man who understands too late the gravity of his actions. The chairman of the committee spoke. "We are gathered here today to examine the allegations of discrimination, wrongful arrest and excessive use of power against Sergeant Mark Ellison, dated October 12. He paused, then looked at Clarice. "Madam Judge Beaufort, you may testify." Clarice takes herself. Her voice, soft but firm, resonated in the room. "I am not here to humiliate a man, but to remind everyone that the law is not an instrument of domination. That day, I was not a judge, I was not a woman of influence. I was simply a black citizen behind the wheel of my car." All eyes turned towards Ellison. Clarice continued. "I was arrested without any checks, handcuffed without cause, and tried without defense. This is not just an administrative error, it is a moral error." The chairman of the committee asked. "Sergeant Ellison, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Ellison stood up with difficulty. His hands were trembling. "Madam Judge. Madam Beaufort. He paused, searching for his words. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't do anything wrong. I saw a black woman in an expensive car, and I assumed. I let my prejudices speak before my reason." A murmur rippled through the room. Ellison took a deep breath, his eyes moist. "That day, I learned that a uniform does not protect against stupidity or ignorance. I am ashamed, not only for myself, but for what I represented at that moment." Clarice looked at him for a long time, without hatred. Then she declared, "Mr. Ellison, justice doesn't just punish. It repairs, it educates. If you're sincere, turn this shame into a commitment. Never let anyone go through what I went through again." A heavy silence fell. The committee chairman cleared his throat. "After deliberation, Sergeant Ellison is suspended for 3 months without pay and will undergo a mandatory program on racial bias and police ethics." Some in the room felt the punishment was lenient. But Clarice, for her part, gave a faint smile. She knew that punishment alone was not enough, a change of conscience was needed. As she left the room, Ellison approached discreetly. "Thank you, for not crushing me when you had the power to do so." Clarice replied calmly. "I didn't mean to crush you, Sergeant. I wanted you to see." As she left the building, she caught the eye of several young police officers. In their eyes, she saw something new, respect mixed with questioning. Justice, on that day, had not only spoken, it had taught. A few weeks later, the events surrounding the unjust arrest of Judge Clarice Beaufort had taken on national proportions. News channels were still broadcasting his speech in the public square, which had gone viral and been shared millions of times on social media. In schools, universities, police academies, his words resonated like an echo of truth that no one could ignore anymore. One morning, Clarice was in her office at the courthouse, surrounded by files. The door opened gently. It was Antoine Delacroix, the Attorney General, his loyal ally since the beginning of this storm. He held a sealed envelope in his hands. "You'll never guess what it is," he said, a discreet smile on his lips. Clarice looked up, intrigued. "I'm listening." "The President himself just signed an executive order. He wants you to head the new National Commission for Police Reform and Racial Justice." The silence that followed was long. Clarice remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the document. Then, slowly, she breathed. "Ironical, isn't it? The woman who was handcuffed a month ago is now tasked with rethinking how the police treat citizens." Delacroix smiled. Justice sometimes has a subtle sense of humor. She opened the envelope and read the presidential letter with restrained emotion. Each line reminded him of the silent struggle of so many years, the past humiliations, the looks of mistrust, the battles won through sheer dignity. She finally said, "I accept. But on one condition." "Which?" "Sergeant Ellison should be part of the pilot program. I want him to teach, to bear witness. Mistakes are more valuable when they become lessons." Delacroix remained speechless for a moment, then nodded his head. "You are incorrigible. Always seeking redemption where others would seek revenge." Clarisse smiled gently. "Revenge destroys, Antoine. But justice repairs." A few weeks later, in a large conference room filled with officers, citizens, and journalists, Clarisse took her place at the center of the stage. Beside him, Sergeant Mark Ellison, now transformed, seemed to carry an invisible weight on his shoulders, that of regained consciousness. Clarisse spoke. "We are not here to blame, but to understand. Fear, ignorance, and prejudice do not disappear by decree. They disappear when the courage to see and listen becomes stronger than the fear of admitting our mistakes." The room remained suspended, hanging on his every word. Then, in an emotional voice, Ellison continued. "I am living proof of what she says. I judged before I knew. And it was she, the woman I humiliated, who taught me what it truly meant to serve the public." A thunderous applause erupted. Some police officers were crying. On that day, a new dialogue was born between two worlds that seemed to be diametrically opposed. As she left the building, Clarisse looked up at the winter sky. The cold wind caressed her face. She thought of her ancestors, of all those who had walked, spoken, and suffered so that one day, a black woman could stand up to injustice without hatred, but with light. Delacroix joined her, his hands in his pockets. "You know, Clarisse, you haven't just won your fight. You've opened a path." She smiled, gazing into the distance. "No, Antoine. This road already existed. I simply removed some dust so that it could be seen again." And as they walked away side by side, the sun slowly broke through the clouds, illuminating the courthouse steps. Where it all began. A year had passed since the Beaufort affair, as the media now called it. What had initially been a humiliating incident had transformed into a historic movement of reform and collective consciousness. Throughout the country, police stations now displayed a motto inspired by Clarisse's words. "To serve is not to suspect. To protect is first and foremost to listen." Under the direction of the National Commission for Police Reform, hundreds of officers were trained to recognize their unconscious biases. Community programs emerged in several states, bringing police officers and citizens together around the same table, a first in decades. Clarisse Beaufort, for her part, had refused interviews, awards, and television appearances. She continued to serve on the Court of Appeal, discreet and firm, faithful to her mission. But in the corridors of power, her name now evoked the quiet courage of a woman who had forced a country to look at itself in the mirror. One morning, as she was leaving the courthouse, a young police officer stopped her on the steps. He was wearing a brand new uniform and a badge he had just earned at the academy. "Madam Judge Beaufort?" "Yes, young man," she replied, surprised. He lowered his head, moved. "I just wanted to say thank you. It's because of your story that I wanted to become a police officer. Not to arrest, but to understand." Clarisse remained silent for a moment, touched by the boy's sincerity. Then she gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "So never forget this, the day you judge someone without listening to them, you cease to be a protector. And justice, on that day, loses a little of its soul." The young man nodded, his eyes shining. She walked away slowly, her calm footsteps echoing on the courthouse steps. Behind her, the wind made the American flag flutter, a symbol of an ideal she had never stopped believing was possible. And in an office adorned with frames and newspaper clippings, Antoine Delacroix contemplated a photograph. Clarisse, standing, surrounded by police officers and civilians, raising her hand in a sign of unity. Below the photo, an inscription engraved in gold letters. "Justice does not seek revenge. It sheds light on what needs to change. He smiled, remembering the first time he had seen her handcuffed in that police station. What an irony of fate, the humiliated woman had become the symbol of a national awakening. And somewhere, in this great but still imperfect country, the trace of Clarice Beaufort's courage continued to inspire those who still believed that justice, when it rises, can heal even the deepest wounds.